picture this. You're walking through Lisbon, you know, soaking at the sun, maybe grabbing a coffee,
Yeah.
and you have no idea that you're standing on cursed ground, like literally cursed centuries ago. Nothing was supposed to grow there again.
Yeah.
That's the legacy of the Távora family.
Yeah.
A whole dynasty wiped out,
Okay.
caught in this web of intrigue and royal power struggles. And today we're going deep into 18th century Portugal, when a massive earthquake and a near-fatal assassination attempt set the stage for someone to seize power.
You know what's interesting is that earthquake back in 1755, it wasn't just a natural disaster. I mean, it really did reshape the entire political scene. The destruction was so widespread that it felt like the end of the world to so many.
Hmm.
And that kind of vulnerability, that fear, it created the perfect conditions for someone ambitious to take control.
So we've got all this chaos, and then there's King Jose. From what I've read, he was more into pleasure than politics, which sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Yeah, it definitely left a gap in leadership, an opportunity that Sebastian Jose de Carvalho y Melo, the Marquis de Pombal, he was quick to capitalize on. He was a cunning guy, very ambitious. And he took charge of the rebuilding. But he also had these grander plans for Portugal.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Devastating earthquake. A king who's more into partying than ruling. And an ambitious figure waiting in the wings, like the first act of a Shakespearean tragedy.
It really is Pombal's rise to power. I mean, it was marked by these impressive reforms, but also these ruthless tactics. He saw the earthquake as a chance to rebuild Lisbon, sure, but also to modernize the whole country. And to do that, he had to break the grip of the old powers, the ones he saw as obstacles.
So who are these old powers that Pombal saw standing in his way?
Mainly the nobility, especially the Távora family. They were very influential. And then you have the Jesuit order. They held a lot of religious and political power. Pombal saw both of them as threats to his vision for a more centralized and modern Portugal.
Okay, so we've got Pombal with this vision for a new Portugal. He's facing off against the Távora family and the Jesuits. You can practically feel the tension building. And then in 1758, King Jose III is almost assassinated. That must have been a huge shock to the country.
Absolutely. The king was shot while returning from a late-night rendezvous. And while he survived, the country was definitely on edge. This was Pombal's moment to really solidify his power and get rid of his rivals.
And who did he blame for this attack?
The Távora family, of course. And this is where the story takes a really dramatic, even scandalous turn.
Oh, come on, you can't just leave it at that. What happened?
Well, it turns out that the king's mistress at the time, Teresa de Távora, was married to a member of the Távora family. This connection, whether it was just coincidence or not, it was enough for Pombal to paint them as this family desperate to regain their power, willing to do anything.
So he uses this assassination attempt to take down his rivals.
Yeah.
Talk about convenient. So what happens next? Did the Távora family just accept these accusations?
No, not exactly. They denied any involvement. But Pombal's hold on power was already too strong. He launched this quick and brutal investigation using torture to get confessions. It was a show trial meant to have a predetermined outcome.
And the sources we're looking at, they don't hold back on the details of what happened next. It wasn't just a trial, it was a public spectacle.
Absolutely. It was a performance of power meant to instill fear and obedience. 7 members of the Távora family, including the elderly Marquis, they were publicly executed in Lisbon's main square. Thousands were forced to watch, a very chilling reminder of what happened to those who defied Pombal.
I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been. But Pombal wasn't satisfied, was he? He wanted to erase the Távora family completely.
You're right. Their name was banned, their family crest was forbidden, and their palaces were destroyed. Even their land was salted, a symbolic gesture to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again. A chilling display of Pombal's absolute power.
And what about the people connected to the Távora family? Like Teresa, the king's mistress. Was she spared?
No, she was imprisoned in a convent, separated from her children, forced to live out her days in isolation. Even people who just associated with the Távora family weren't safe.
It sounds like nobody who crossed Pombal was safe. So tell me more about these other people who were targeted.
One notable figure was Father Gabriel Malagrida. He was a Jesuit priest and a close friend of the Távora family. He was accused of treason and heresy, publicly humiliated and executed. His trial was a clear attack on the Jesuit order, which Pombal saw as a rival.
So Pombal's actions were clearly about more than just punishing people for the assassination attempt? It was about purging anyone who threatened his authority. He was using the fear from the earthquake and the assassination attempt to reshape Portugal.
That's a good point. And it's important to remember that Pombal ruled for almost 2 decades. This period saw significant reforms. He overhauled the education system, restructured the military, implemented economic policies, but all of it was achieved under a cloud of fear and repression.
So he's this complex figure, a ruthless tyrant, but also a modernizing reformer. He brought Portugal into a new era, but at a terrible human cost. It's a fascinating and disturbing paradox.
Exactly. And it raises this question that historians still debate today. Was Pombal truly driven by a desire to improve Portugal, or was he just an opportunist who exploited a crisis to gain power? It's a question that still hangs over his legacy. So let's dig into the evidence against the Távora family. Most of it was based on those forced confessions.
Right, the ones they got through torture. I can't imagine those would hold up in court today. It makes you think about how things were back then.
Yeah, it's definitely different from our legal system now, but back then, torture was a common way to get information. They thought the pain would make people confess the truth.
It seems more like it would make them say anything to make it stop, whether it was true or not.
Exactly. That's why historians are so skeptical of those confessions. They're seen as unreliable, forced.
But there was other evidence, too.
Like, what was there anything solid that linked them to the assassination attempt? Pombal pointed to their connections with people who opposed the king, suggesting a conspiracy. He also brought up their past issues with the crown, implying revenge as a motive.
So he was building a case based on their connections and conflicts with the king? Was it really enough to prove anything?
That's the debate. Some historians think Pombal was manipulating things. Maybe he made up evidence or exaggerated it to get a conviction. Others say the Távora family, with their power, could have been a real threat. So they were easy scapegoats for Pombal's ambitions.
So we have these two sides. On one hand, a powerful family. Maybe they were resentful of the king and connected to his opponents. On the other hand, a ruthless minister who might do anything for power. It's like a historical mystery.
And that's why the Távora affair is still so interesting. It's full of mystery and uncertainty. We don't have all the answers. We're left wondering if an innocent family was sacrificed for Pombal's gain and if the truth is lost forever.
It's a scary thought. It makes you wonder how much we really know about the past, especially when powerful people can shape the story and change evidence.
It reminds us that history is often written by the winners. And in this case, Pombal won, at least for a while. His version of events became the official story, and it took a long time for the Távora family to even be partially cleared.
Speaking of Pombal's downfall, I want to know more about Queen Maria's efforts to undo his policies and clear the Távora name. It seems like she really wanted to fix the wrongs of the past. What were her reasons for doing that?
Queen Maria. I was a devout Catholic. She saw Pombal's actions against the church, like expelling the Jesuits, as a direct attack. She believed he went too far and undermined the traditional values of Portugal.
So her opposition to Pombal was more than just personal. It came from her religious beliefs.
Right. But it wasn't only about religion. She also had empathy for the nobility who suffered under Pombal's rule. The Távora family was a prime example, and she felt it was her duty to restore their reputation.
So she was trying to heal the country after years of chaos and fear. But clearing the Távora name must have been controversial. Did everyone agree they were innocent?
Not everyone. Pombal still had supporters who believed the Távora family was guilty. They thought Queen Maria was ruining his legacy of progress and modernization. They saw her as weak and controlled by the church.
So even after Pombal lost power, the debate about the Távora affair continued to divide people. It seems like the damage was deep.
Absolutely. It took generations for those wounds to heal. The Távora affair became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked power, the fragility of justice, and the lasting impact of trauma and division.
It's amazing how this event from centuries ago still have power today. It shows how history shapes our world and our place in it.
It also reminds us that justice can be a long and difficult process. It can be delayed or denied, but sometimes even after generations, truth comes out.
That's a hopeful thought, that even in the darkest times, truth and justice can win.
Indeed. And the Távora family story reminds us to keep asking questions, keep searching for truth, and keep demanding those in power are held accountable.
Well said. Now, you mentioned the Távora family was eventually cleared, but their name was still tarnished. Was there any attempt to completely erase that stain of treason?
Queen Maria. I did what she could, but it wasn't easy. Pombal had spent years demonizing them, and those stories stuck with people.
It seems like it would take something big, something truly symbolic to really restore their legacy. Did that ever happen?
Well, there's one interesting detail that speaks to the Távora family's lasting legacy. Remember how Pombal had their palace destroyed and the land salted so nothing could grow there?
Yes, it was a cruel act to erase them from history. What happened to that cursed land?
Ironically, that very spot is now a Starbucks.
Wait, a Starbucks? On the land Pombal cursed? That's unbelievable.
It's as if history itself is making fun of Pombal's attempt to erase the Távora family. Their name might be tarnished, but they're still present in the most unexpected way.
It's a powerful symbol. It shows that memory endures and trying to control history is pointless.
It also shows how complex history is. What was once seen as betrayal is now a place where people gather, a symbol of community.
It reminds us that we're always reinterpreting the past based on the present. And sometimes those new interpretations can be surprisingly positive.
Exactly. The Távora family story is a reminder that history isn't fixed. It's alive and always changing and surprising us.
This whole deep dive has been full of surprises and insights. I feel like I have a new understanding of this part of Portuguese history.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been great exploring this topic with you.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the Távora affair and what it means today. What should our listener take away from this?
Well, I think one of the big takeaways from the Távora affair is that history is rarely black and white. It's messy and complicated, full of contradictions, just like Pombal himself.
Yeah, he's a tough one to figure out.
Definitely. I mean, he had big ambitions, he was smart, and the reforms he put in place really did modernize Portugal in a lot of ways. But he was also capable of incredible cruelty and ruthlessness. His legacy is this mix of progress and oppression. It shows how even people who want to make things better can be corrupted by power.
It also makes you think about how those who control the story often control history. Pombal was so good at manipulating people. Using propaganda and fear to stay in power makes you wonder how many other historical events have been twisted or rewritten to fit someone's agenda.
That's a really important point. That's why we need to be critical when we look at history. Question what we're told and consider different points of view. The Távora affair, with all its conflicting stories and unanswered questions, is a great example of why we shouldn't just accept the official version of events.
It's like we're detectives trying to solve a case from centuries ago, piecing together clues and trying to understand what really happened. And sometimes those clues lead to surprising discoveries, things that challenge what we thought we knew.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so exciting. It's a never-ending process of learning, uncovering new information, and looking at familiar stories in new ways. The Távora affair, even after all these years, still makes us question things and think differently.
It definitely has for me. I started this deep dive thinking I knew a bit about the Távora affair, but now I see it so differently. It's not just a historical event. It's a story about human nature, about ambition and betrayal, the desire for power, and the fight for justice.
And it's a story that still speaks to us today. We're still dealing with corruption, abuse of power, and people twisting the truth. The Távora affair, even though it happened in 18th century Portugal, it deals with issues that are still relevant today no matter where you are.
And it reminds us that the past is never really over. It affects us in ways we might not even realize. And sometimes, like with that Starbucks on the cursed land, it shows up in unexpected places, making us think about how the past shapes the present.
I love that analogy. The Távora family, even though Pombal tried to erase them, they're still remembered, debated about. And they even have a presence in that ordinary coffee shop. Their story shows how powerful truth is and how resilient people can be.
It's been amazing exploring this historical mystery with you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and walking us through the Távora affair. I feel like I have a much better understanding of this important part of Portuguese history and what it means for us today.
You're welcome. I always enjoy getting into these historical puzzles, and I hope everyone listening found it interesting and something to think about.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
And until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching for the truth, no matter where it takes you.